Richard Cook has a question. What is the rarest model that you saw / handled while you were at ILM? I saw some real doozies while I was there. When Spielberg was redoing E.T., which we called Boy's Life as the internal marker for it so no one would know we were working on E.T., two things came through the shop. One was a fully animatronic model of E.T. that had been rebuilt for that film, and the model got dropped off in D building, and it was like 5 o'clock on a Friday, and we all picked up the RC and we all animated E.T.'s face for like 2 hours, making his eyes go. So much freaking fun. I'd be telling a different story if we had broken it, but we did not. The other thing that came through was the mothership from E.T., because the big dome of the mothership of E.T. is this like hand-rubbed graphite and aluminum powder masterpiece. If I remember, it's Mike Fulmer that made that. I can't quite remember, but the model maker was long retired from ILM. They called him up to say, how did you do the finish on the mothership? And he said, go to hell, send me the model and I'll redo the finish for you. And he did. And then that model came back to ILM and I got to see it up close. And it is one of the loveliest things you've ever seen. I think it's on display at the Smithsonian. Or is that a different mothership? That's the Close Encounters mothership that's at the Smithsonian. The E.T. mothership is probably still at ILM's coffers, but I don't know. At any rate, that might be the rarest of all the pieces I got to see up close. I did get to repair Jango Fett's back rocket pack at one point. One of the rockets broke off, and I repaired that. That felt pretty cool. And at another point, I found Obi-Wan's cloak under my desk where it had been sitting for a year and a half. Nobody knew that it was there. Nobody knew that it existed. I was like, hey, Brian, is this something important? He was like, oh, my God. Who knew? But Rob Langridge says, when you were tasked with building a model for production like Star Wars or The Matrix, was there a certain amount of creative freedom allowed in its construction? Or was there a very strict plan you had to follow? Both. If it's a large model, if it's anything bigger than this, you need to agree upon its basic structure. And so often our department will give you some sometimes rough and sometimes highly detailed blueprints. There are art directors I worked with that loved to do all of their ideation in ZBrush or a 3D program, so they were able to extrapolate all the dimensions for you that you needed to work in the size that you were working. So that kind of stuff there's no creative freedom in that for the most part. You're getting a drawing of a ship, you're asked to replicate it, and so you've got to figure out its structure. That's I'm not going to say that's not creative work, but it's not the creative work that you're thinking of in terms of creative freedom. The work you're thinking of, for the most part, is the final detailing. For the most part, I remember working on Topoka City, the water planet from episode 2 with those big dome buildings. And most of the buildings are domed, except one has this big sort of Devil's Tower promontory sticking off the top of it. That's the hero building. That's the building in front of which Jango and Obi-Wan fight in episode 2. And that was my task for the Topoka City build. I built that thing in two and a half weeks. 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. It was a very fast build. And the first time I built the conning tower, Brian Gurnam, my supervisor, came in and he was like, it doesn't look like the drawing. And I'm like, well, I thought it looks like this drawing. He's like, this other drawing, I think you need to make the whole thing an inch thinner. And he was right. I pulled it off. I sawed it out. I cleaned that up and I put it back. And then, so that's me taking care of all the effective busy work of structure, right? I had this big dome. Mark Buck had done all the sweeps for these domes and we had vacuum formed them. But when it came time to add the paneling, we didn't get much of a plan at all. Doug Chang or Pablo would tell you, the effects supervisor, they would just be like, give it some panels at this scale and make it look like it's 1,100 feet tall. They would tell you stuff like that. So all the paneling I got to do just by looking at what Fogler and Goodson and Duncan were all doing and sort of replicating their panelization. And then going up to the model shop and clipping out model parts and just sort of detailing stuff as I saw fit. And that's a process. I mean, in that you do get a fair bit of creative freedom, or you're not that useful, right? Because it's not like the art department wants to draw every inch of every model and have you replicate it. There's not enough time in the world for that. They want to give you a gesture, a drawing that communicates the idea of scale, and then you've got to solve that problem for each of the pie slices surrounding the perimeter of this thing. So what I like to say is model work, like many other jobs, is 90% tedium and drudgery. It absolutely, you are sitting there cutting and then gluing 100 rivets, roughly equidistant, all the way around the perimeter of the thing. Or you're making 75 of the same arrangement of model parts and castings, and you're lining them all up. And if you can do that 90% drudgery with focus and attention, and you can run disasters off at the pass, and you also have some aesthetic ability, and the art director knows that, that's when you get the creative freedom. You got to, I would say it's paying your dues, but it's not paying your dues. It's just part of the job. You got to deliver the drudgery so you get to do the fun part. And like I said, the fun part is 5 or 10%. Frankly, the fun part of builds in here is only 5 or 10%. Most of it is true drudgery. But again, the holy drudgery from which all things stem.
Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support us even further, you can by becoming a tested member. Details are, of course, below, but it includes all sorts of perks, and we're building them all the time. You get advanced Word and behind-the-scenes photos of some of our projects. Questions, you get to ask direct questions during my live streams, and we have some members-only videos, including the Adam real-time series of unbroken, unedited shots of me working here in the shop. They are weirdly meditative. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you on the next one.